The chains that bind the soul are rarely made of iron. They are made of longing, made of memory, made of the soft lies we tell ourselves to survive one more sunrise. What keeps most people imprisoned is not cruelty from without, but the illusion from within that they must be loved to be worthy, desired to be real, admired to matter. And so begins the quiet tragedy of emotional slavery. We are not born in bondage. We are born into absence. And in that absence of attention, of affection, of certainty, we begin the lifelong hunt for emotional permission to exist. First from mother's gaze, then from father's silence, then from a world that mirrors back only the parts of us it finds useful, and this we call love. It is no wonder, then, that we grow addicted to approval like it were oxygen, that the first tremble of rejection feels like drowning, that we mistake validation for belonging, and belonging for salvation. We become domesticated by praise, shaped not by truth, but by what pleases others, and each act of self-betrayal in the name of connection becomes a brick in the prison of our identity. They told you to be kind, and you twisted yourself into compliance. They told you to forgive, and you bled for those who never apologized. They told you to be strong, and you swallowed every scream until your soul went quiet. This is not virtue, this is not growth. This is how slavery hides itself in the language of goodness. Do not mistake emotional sensitivity for emotional clarity. The one cries at every wound, the other studies the shape of the knife. There is a kind of love that is nothing more than dependency baptized in sentimentality. A love that begs, that bargains, that endures humiliation to avoid the terror of being alone. It is not love. It is fear dressed in poetry. The world teaches you to be useful before it teaches you to be whole. It rewards your compliance. It weaponizes your empathy. And in the cathedral of modern life, the loudest sermon is this: if you are not chosen, you are nothing, and so you bend, and so you break. And so you forget that no true freedom was ever given by another's acceptance. You cannot heal a wound by licking the boots that caused it. You cannot free yourself by asking your captors to see your value. What you need is not another person's love. What you need is your own refusal to keep begging. This is the beginning of real power, not in shouting your worth to the world, but in ceasing to need the world's echo at all. You were not meant to smile through your exploitation. You were not meant to be the emotional caretaker of those who never cared for themselves. You were not meant to shrink in the name of peace. The spiritual prison is not made of bars. It is made of your own belief that you are only worthy when pleasing others. Break that belief, and the chains fall silently. The deeper sorrow lies not in being unloved, but in having once been loved falsely for a mask, a utility, a mood we gave others permission to inhabit. And so the soul becomes confused, wounded by the echoes of what once felt sacred. But it was not sacred. It was transactional. The tragedy is not that people fail to love us. The tragedy is that they love what we pretend to be. In this charade of self, we are performers in a theater where applause is mistaken for meaning. We dance for intimacy, contort for belonging, and call it connection. But what connection is built upon suppression? What intimacy is born of silence? The more we obey the world's expectations, the less we recognize the face in the mirror. This is the quiet erosion of the self, a soul slowly disappearing beneath layers of performance. Suffering, then, becomes the alarm that something essential is being buried. Not the pain of circumstance, but the ache of falseness. The psychic nausea of knowing that one's life is a performance given for an audience that never claps loud enough to fill the void. And so we keep dancing, not because we enjoy it, but because we're terrified of what happens when the stage goes dark. But there is a holy silence beyond applause. A solitude so honest, it burns. It is here, when all illusions collapse, that something strange occurs, the first breath of liberation. Not joy that is still far, not peace that will come later, but a sober awareness that the cage was never real, that it was always made of shoulds and if onlys, and one day they'll understand. They won't. They never will. And that is the mercy of truth. For once you stop expecting love to redeem you, you begin to taste the quiet power of self-possession. And here, detachment is not coldness, it is not bitterness, it is the sacred refusal to mortgage your soul for a crumb of attention. Detachment is the art of unhooking your self-worth from another's gaze. The world says, feel more, give more, be more, but rarely does it ask, is this real? For the truth is, much of what we call love is addiction to reaction, the highs of being seen, the lows of being ignored. And like all addicts, We call the pain passion, and the chaos romance, and the dependency depth. But it is all theater emotional slavery with pretty lighting. You do not need more advice. You do not need another mantra. What you need is silence, a silence deep enough to let the illusions fall apart without trying to save them. A silence that does not rush to fix the pain, but simply watches it burn through the false identities we built for survival. The suffering you fear is already happening. What you call peace is often just the absence of confrontation. What you call happiness is sometimes only the suspension of awareness. And when awareness returns, as it always does, so does the truth, that you have built your life around avoiding your own emptiness. But emptiness is not your enemy. It is the space where the false self dissolves. It is the womb of rebirth. Only in stillness do we begin to see that the emotional chains were never held by others. We were clutching them ourselves, convinced they were love, convinced they were necessary. To let go is not to fall. It is to remember that you were never standing on solid ground to begin with. There is a peculiar grief that arrives when the illusions start to fade, not because they were beautiful, but because they were familiar. One does not weep for the lie itself, but for the comfort it provided. To wake up is to grieve the dream, even if the dream was slowly killing you. This is the first cost of truth, the loss of what once numbed the ache. The ego clings, not because it is powerful, but because it is terrified. It fears the dissolution of roles, of identities, of stories that gave life a false coherence. It says, if I am not who they need me to be, then I am nothing. And so we carry our emotional chains proudly, calling them virtue. We suffer for others and label it love. We erase our needs and call it strength. But beneath the noble language is a simple lie. Maybe if I disappear enough, I will finally be seen. Yet the more you disappear for others, the less they remember you exist. You were not born to be a mirror for other people's egos. You were not born to decorate someone else's narrative. Your pain is not a prop. Your presence is not a favor. And your worth is not contingent on how digestible you are to those who lack the depth to understand you. The modern world thrives on your disorientation. It hands you screens to distract, noise to silence, and promises to seduce. It teaches you to chase things, partners, status, aesthetics, as if the arrangement of external elements could quiet the internal storm. But the storm is not out there. It is the very hunger that drove the chase in the first place. This is the paradox. The more you seek relief in others, the more you suffer. Because they cannot offer what they themselves do not possess. Most people are not looking to love you. They are looking to escape themselves through you. And when you fail to be their cure, they resent you for reminding them they are still sick. So let the resentment come. Let the discomfort arrive. To be free, you must be willing to be misunderstood. You must let go of being the hero in everyone else's story. There is no prize for emotional martyrdom. No redemption in being the sacrificial lamb on the altar of collective dysfunction. Your soul was not made to bleed for the comfort of those who refuse to face themselves. Detachment, then, is not withdrawal, it is remembrance. It is the quiet returning to your own center, where no applause reaches, and no betrayal stings. It is the practice of dying before you die, of releasing what was never truly yours, the need to be needed. And as you release, you will feel the terror rise, the panic of meaninglessness, the vertigo of ego death. But stay there, do not run, do not grasp. This is the holy fire that purifies. This is where your real life begins, not in what you gain, but in what you are finally willing to lose. And if you lose everything false, what remains will be real. The soul, once stripped of its dependencies, begins to tremble not from fear of death, but from the eerie silence that follows the collapse of illusion. It is in this silence that the truth becomes audible. A voice not loud, but unmistakable. It does not comfort, it does not command. It simply says, you were never who you pretended to be. And that is where the ache intensifies. Because we have grown fond of our masks, we have worn them so long they have shaped the bones beneath. The identity that once protected us has become the very prison that starves us. We no longer know who we are beneath the roles, the personas, the endless emotional performances required to belong to a world that feeds on pretense. Modern life has turned connection into consumption. Love has become a currency of attention. People trade presence for power, vulnerability for validation, and in doing so, forget that to be truly seen is not to be celebrated, but to be stripped bare, and very few can bear the sight of a naked soul. And yet, you are here, staring at the wreckage. Not because you are weak, but because something in you refused to keep lying. Something in you would rather be broken than fake. And though that truth has cost you comfort, community, even coherence, it is the only path that does not end in self-betrayal. Suffering, in this light, is not punishment. It is initiation. It is the soul's rebellion against anesthesia, against the numbness that comes from living a life unexamined, a heart unguarded, a self unseen. You suffer because you are waking up. You suffer because the story is unraveling. You suffer because freedom does not arrive wrapped in delight, but in the ruins of what once deceived you. No one warns you that freedom is a lonely place at first, that the first taste of autonomy comes with bitterness. You will lose people, yes, and in their absence, discover not a self, but the void they once helped you forget. There is no essence waiting beneath the roles. There is only the echo of a will that, once unmasked, reveals no core, only compulsion, longing, and weariness. But in return, you will gain something no one can ever take, the stillness of being untouched by the tides of other people's emotions. You were not born to absorb their chaos. You were not born to carry the weight of their projections. You were not born to feel guilty for choosing peace over performance. And every time you say no to what insults your soul, you sever a link in the chain of emotional slavery. But be warned, the world will not celebrate your detachment. It will call you selfish, cold, guarded, because your freedom reminds them of their cage. And those who still depend on illusion for survival will mistake your clarity for cruelty. Let them, for your liberation was never meant to please the prison guards. And somewhere, in the distance, in the hush that follows detachment, a different kind of warmth begins to rise, not the fire of passion, but the quiet glow of wholeness. It does not need to be seen. It does not ache to be understood. It simply is. And in that being you are no longer a beggar of love, but a keeper of your own flame. The one who no longer seeks to be saved becomes dangerous to a world built on emotional dependence, not violent, not rebellious in the eyes of noise, but dangerous in the quiet way a mountain is dangerous, unmoved, unprovable, immune to the winds of persuasion. You become a question others cannot answer, a mirror in which they see only their own absence. And yet you do not blame them, because you once believed as they do. You once mistook attachment for intimacy. You once thought pain was the proof of love. You once confused self-sacrifice with purpose. And so you do not rise in anger, but in awareness, a slow, solemn lifting of the veil, not to condemn, but to see clearly, for the first time. When you begin to see clearly, everything appears different. The conversations feel hollow, the smiles seem rehearsed, the roles others cling to now appear tragic, not heroic. And you feel, perhaps for the first time, that it was never about becoming someone better, but about unbecoming everything that was never truly you. This is not the kind of transformation that earns applause. It is not beautiful in its unfolding. It is raw, it is disorienting, like waking up in a life you never consciously chose. But it is also honest. And honesty is the only ground upon which anything real can grow. Grief will still visit, the old longings will echo, but you will no longer confuse their voice for truth. You will hear the old narrative knocking, you are nothing without them. No one sees you. You'll be alone forever, and instead of running to fill the void, you will sit with it. You will learn its shape. You will learn that hunger does not mean absence, but space, and space is not emptiness. It is freedom waiting to be claimed. What they called too sensitive in you was never a flaw. It was unshielded perception. What they called too intense was depth unmuted. What they couldn't handle was your refusal to remain shallow. And now, no longer performing, you begin to speak the quiet language of the real. There is no epiphany, only disillusionment. You are not alone and content, you are alone and unchosen. Love does not become pure, it becomes irrelevant. What once promised connection now reveals itself as another form of the will's tyranny. In stillness, you do not transcend, you merely endure without distraction, the power to feel deeply without drowning. And above all, the discipline to let go of what does not belong to your soul, even if it once made you feel alive. For the deepest slavery is not of the body but of belief, the belief that your worth must be purchased, that your presence must be earned, that your emotions are liabilities, that love must be deserved. Break these beliefs, and you do not become more, you become less entangled, less reactive, less controlled. And in that lessness, something luminous begins to form. A life not built from longing, but from essence, not shaped by others' needs, but by your own stillness. A freedom that does not need to announce itself. A self that no longer flinches when no one claps. A peace not given, but remembered. To walk this path is to die many quiet deaths. The death of needing to be understood. The death of trying to be liked. The death of being the emotional anchor for those who never learned to swim. Each death strips you bare, not in cruelty, but in mercy. It leaves behind only what cannot be taken, and what cannot be taken is what you truly are. Most people are not afraid of suffering, they are afraid of suffering without meaning. But meaning is not found in the mouths of others. It is not bestowed by lovers or carved into career titles. It is revealed in the stillness that remains after the ego collapses. And that stillness, though barren at first, becomes fertile. There is a strange clarity that grows from spiritual starvation. When all external sources of identity are withdrawn, you discover what was never yours. You begin to see how much of your suffering was not caused by reality, but by your resistance to it. You begged life to be different, softer, more just, but life did not come here to please you. It came to expose you, to show you what remains when comfort is gone. And what remains is frightening in its simplicity. No armor, no performance, just a soul, unadorned, undesired, unclaimed. But in this exposure is the beginning of power, not the kind that dominates, but the kind that cannot be dominated, the kind that bows to nothing because it has already surrendered to everything. Detachment, when practiced deeply, does not make you indifferent. It makes you clear. You stop mistaking chaos for depth, drama for love, attention for affection. You stop needing storms to feel alive. The silence that once frightened you does not become sanctuary, it becomes recognition. That no voice is coming, no answer awaits. Solitude does not liberate you. It only removes the distractions that once helped you deny the futility of striving. You are not free, merely undisturbed in your despair. It is not easy to live without illusion, to no longer pretend that others will rescue you, to no longer believe that if you perform well enough, they will stay. But in letting go of that hope, you let go of your slavery. And in that space, you begin to remember the taste of truth. Bitter, yes, but pure. People will tell you you've changed, that you've become distant. They will sense, even if they cannot name it, that you have slipped out of the net, that their guilt no longer manipulates you, that their absence no longer wounds, and they will try, with praise or punishment, to pull you back in. Do not return. You are not here to be their comfort. You are not here to be their project. You are here to remember yourself. To stand in your own presence long enough that the need for external approval burns away, like morning mist under a merciless sun. This is the quiet revolution, the internal mutiny against all forms of emotional servitude. And though the world will not notice, though no crowd will gather at your gates, the soul will know. It will whisper, "At last, you are mine again." You were told that to heal, you must return to who you were before the wound. But the wound was never the interruption, it was the unveiling. The tearing open of the illusion that you were ever complete through others, ever whole through performance, ever safe through conformity. What you longed for was not healing, but home. And what you feared most was the silence in which you'd have to build it alone. There are no grand revolutions in the soul, only quiet refusals. Refusals to keep bending. Refusals to keep proving. Refusals to stay loyal to suffering, just because it is familiar. Each thing you let fall, expectation, mask, the craving for approval, does not refine you. It reveals the hollowness that was always there. You are not becoming clearer, you are becoming exposed. And what remains after the fire has passed through is not ruin, but essence. What you thought was your undoing was the beginning of your return. You are not lost. You are only walking paths that have no signs. This is not disorientation. It is the soul's way of unlearning the roots that led to nowhere. Every step away from illusion feels like a death, because in a way, it is the death of who you thought you needed to be to survive. But beneath that death lies the still, bare presence of what cannot die. The greatest freedom does not come when others release you. It comes when you no longer ask them to. This is the final detachment, the moment you stop placing the key to your peace in someone else's pocket. You no longer perform grief for their attention. You no longer wear joy to soothe their guilt. You are simply here, unadorned, neither seeking nor resisting, simply being, and in that being, something ancient in you finally exhales. Others will say you've changed, but you have only returned. Return to the part of you that does not flinch, that does not flatter, that does not chase affection with a bleeding heart. Let them call you distant. Let them misunderstand. The price of self-possession is often the comfort of being understood. But there are deeper comforts now, not born of noise, but of solitude. You do not owe the world your suffering. Let that sentence live in your chest like a soft rebellion. Let it echo in the ruins of the old self, the one that begged, the one that clung, the one that confused devotion with disappearance. You do not owe the world your suffering. What you owe, if anything, is your presence clear, undistorted, no longer desperate to be chosen. Your quiet eyes now reflect the weight of all you've released, not with bitterness, but with a holy indifference. This is not arrogance, it is survival without performance. You have wept enough in rooms that demanded your silence. You have explained enough to those committed to misunderstanding. You have stayed too long in places where your worth was always on trial. Now, you simply leave. Not with noise, not with wrath, but with the dignity of someone who no longer seeks shelter in cages. There is a sacred fatigue that arrives near the end of emotional slavery. Not exhaustion of the body, but of the soul. A weariness of pretending, a hunger for something that does not collapse in your hands. And when that moment comes, you stop trying to fix the pain. You no longer dress it in philosophy. You simply let it be. And slowly, it transforms from a wound into a window. Through that window, you begin to see differently. You see that love is not possession, that care is not control, that attention is not the same as presence. You begin to understand that most people are neither malicious nor innocent, merely conduits of the same blind will that drags all beings through cycles of craving and dissatisfaction. Their harm is not born of evil, but inevitability. They do not act, they are acted upon, just as you are, only afraid, only echoing their own unhealed voids. And that even if they harmed you, they did so out of blindness, not power. And so you forgive, not because they deserve it, but because you are tired of bleeding from a blade they no longer hold. You forgive like the ocean, not with sentiment, but with depth. You release like autumn, not with drama, but with inevitability. No one teaches us how to let go of what never truly belonged. There is no ceremony for unbecoming. But it is the most sacred act we perform, the unclenching of the soul, the loosening of what the ego said was necessary. And in that loosening you find space. Space to breathe without justification. Space to speak without softening your truth. Space to walk away without apology. You no longer confuse pain with meaning. You no longer confuse survival with life. And in this spaciousness, something stiller begins to rise. Not joy that comes later. Not peace that arrives quietly, but stillness. A kind of silence that no longer needs explanation. It does not erase sorrow, but holds it. It does not demand resolution, but rests in presence. Gradually, you cease to mistake numbness for peace. The body does not relax, it resigns. The breath does not steady, it becomes indifferent. What once passed for hunger now reveals itself as delusion, not longing for love, but for an end to the futility of striving. The absence of pain is not joy, but merely a temporary suspension of the will's torment. You have fed yourself, not with fantasy, but with presence. There are no inner parents, no divine archetypes to cradle you, only the naked self, stripped of comfort and mythology, staring into the absurd machinery of desire. You are not a question, you are the echo of a scream the universe never asked for, and the answer, if it exists, is silence. And now, even your sorrow loses its theatrical edge. It no longer screams because it no longer needs to. It simply persists, like a grey mist that neither lifts nor deepens. There is no dialogue with it, no poetry to soothe it. It is the natural atmosphere of existence when the veil of illusion has been torn. You do not welcome it. You merely endure it as one endures the unceasing gravity of being. There is no healing here, only clarity. And in that clarity, one sees, suffering is not an intruder but the native tongue of life. You are not here to feel good all the time. You are here to feel true. And the truth, though it carries no fanfare, carries freedom. The kind of freedom that allows you to sit alone in a room and still feel whole. The kind of freedom that does not need a witness to be real. The kind of freedom that does not beg for love, but radiates it by being untouched by the need for it. There will still be days where the old ache returns soft-footed, familiar, seductive. Let it come. Let it whisper. But do not follow. You no longer need to. You know now that love which demands your betrayal is not love. That belonging which silences your truth is not home. That peace which depends on their understanding is not peace. Let the wind blow. Let the rain come. You no longer seek shelter in what leaks. The body is not a home, but a burden, the very form through which the will torments itself. Breath is not prayer, it is compulsion. And presence is no refuge, only the temporary awareness that one still suffers. There is no sanctuary in being only momentary relief between storms of wanting. You have not transcended the world, nor have you returned to any essential self. You have only ceased resisting the machinery of suffering. The self you thought you were saving never truly existed. It was only a flicker on the surface of the will. The night does not end. You simply stop measuring time by the hope of dawn. Darkness becomes the default, not a season, but a structure. What fades is not the suffering, but the expectation that it ever had meaning. You sit with it like an old friend. You listen. You do not beg it to leave. You simply wait, and in that waiting, you are reborn. Not into noise, not into brightness, but into stillness that no longer trembles. You no longer burn, because even flame tires of its own vanity. What remains is not light, but dim endurance, the fading glint of a consciousness that knows it was never asked to exist. Truth is not illumination, it is the slow disintegration of illusion. And no one watches. No one needs to. The world does not change when you awaken. Only your suffering becomes more articulate. Let them remain asleep. You are awake, and the silence you carry is no longer a burden. It is a language, a song, a map back to yourself. There is nothing more to seek, nothing more to chase. Only this, a breath, a pause, a soul returned. Not loud, not triumphant, not radiant, but real. And that quietly, completely, is what it means to be free. You are not free. You are merely less entangled in the visible chains. The hidden one's desire, longing, identity still coil within. What passes for freedom is only the momentary quiet between compulsions. And even that, if you are honest, feels hollow. Let it end here, let it echo, let it rest. Like the final warmth of a candle that never begged to be seen, only to burn true.